What if your dominant hand could reveal the desires you don't even admit to yourself? Not the ones you post online, not the ones you politely share at dinner. I'm talking about those deep, unspoken cravings that live beneath the surface, hiding in your gestures, your reflexes, your movements. The kind of desire that doesn't need words to exist, because your body has already been speaking it for years. Carl Jung believed that the body, like dreams, like symbiosis, a language. It doesn't lie, it doesn't filter, it doesn't edit itself for acceptance. And among all the parts of your body that speak, none does it quite as clearly as your dominant hand. The hand you reach out with, the one that writes your name, the one that signs, contracts, touches others, pulls you forward. It's the hand you use when you act without thinking, and because of that, it reveals far more than you realize. We often ignore the simple things show we gesture when we're passionate, how tightly we grip when we're afraid, how instinctively we reach or retract. But within those micro-movements live entire stories. Desires, conflicts, hidden truths. The dominant hand is not just a tool, it's an extension of your psyche. It carries your conscious will, yes, but also the imprint of your unconscious motives. Jung would say that nothing in us is meaningless, that even our smallest physical habits are loaded with psychic weight. So what does your dominant hand say about you? About your hunger, your longing, your resistance to conformity? More than you think. And over the next few chapters, we'll unfold a deeper story, one that your body has been whispering all along. So look at your hand for a moment. Not just the lines, but the way it rests, the tension, the ease, the impulse to move or stay still. There's a map hidden in that palm. And today, we're going to learn how to read it. Start with this. Which hand do you use to open a door? To pour a drink? To wipe away a tear when no one's watching? That's not a trivial question. It's the first clue, because your dominant hand is not just a preference. It's a psychic compass pointing straight at your deepest orientation, toward society or toward the self, toward the external or the internal, toward what's expected or what's suppressed. If you're right-handed, chances are you move more easily in the realm of the conscious. You navigate by the rules, by structure, by learned behavior. The right hand is the hand of the visible self, the one you were taught to use, the one praised in school. It's often aligned with social approval and clear, goal-driven desires. And yet, because it's so exposed, so safe, it often conceals the hunger for something more, something wild, unstructured, raw. The left hand, for you, becomes the gate to the shadow. And we'll get to that. But if you're left-handed, your story bends differently. Left-handedness is rebellion by nature, not always loud, but always defiant. It suggests a current moving against the mainstream, a psychological mirror turned inward. The left hand is the hand of the moon, intuitive, emotionally loaded, less visible but more revealing. It's the hand that leads from the inner world, often tied to deeper self-exploration, emotional depth, and unfiltered desire. What Jung teaches us is that neither is better, neither is worse, but each reveals a different psychic doorway. Right-handedness leans toward projection, what you show, what you achieve, what you reach for with intention. Left-handedness leans toward introspection, what you feel, what you hide, what you long for when the lights go out and the room gets quiet. But here's the twist. The hand you don't use tells just as much of the story, often more, because that's where the unconscious lives, the hand you suppress, the one you train yourself to ignore. Within that tension between dominant and passive lives, the truth Jung always pointed to, we are not one thing, we are dual, and to know ourselves fully, we must read both hands. Not just for what they hold, but for what they resist. More clues await. Keep your hands open. Pay attention the next time you hold something, your phone, a coffee mug, someone's hand. Do you grasp it tightly, knuckles stiff, fingers curled like you're afraid to lose it? Or do you hold loosely, casually, as if nothing can really stay anyway? Maybe you avoid holding at opting for a barrier, a sleeve, a distraction. These aren't just habits. They're revelations. The way you grip the world says everything about how you move through it. Grip is more than physical, it's emotional architecture. Carl Jung often explored how our psyche leaks through bodily expressions, and nowhere is that more evident than in how we hold on or let go. If your dominant hand tends to grip with force, you might be trying to control more than just objects. You might be clinging to certainty, to connection, to something or someone you're afraid to lose. Control for you may be the disguise your fear wears. You grip tightly because surrender feels like danger. But if your hand holds loosely, like nothing really belongs to you, then perhaps you've been taught that closeness comes with a price, that to grip too hard invites disappointment. So you float above, connection calm, graceful, but just out of reach. You touch, but don't fully hold. You love, but don't fully fall. It looks like ease, but deep down, it may be a quiet self-protection, a refusal to bet everything on something that might vanish. And then there are those who avoid touch entirely. The dominant hand stays busy, purposeful, occupied. But when it comes to closeness, to stillness, to simply holding it withdraws, that's not indifference, that's memory. Somewhere along the way, touch may have meant harm, or cost, or obligation. The hand learned to avoid what the heart once couldn't bear. Grip is a language, one of need, of loss, of survival, and in the dominant hand, that language becomes amplified, not because you choose it, but because it chooses you. Watch how you reach for things. Watch how you let go. Somewhere in the tension of your fingers lies a story you've been writing unconscious, lone grip at a time. Take a moment. Look at your handwriting, not the content but the form, the pressure, the slant, the spacing between letters. It doesn't seem like much, just ink on paper, right? But according to Jungian insight, even this seemingly mundane act is a mirror, because your dominant hand doesn't just write your words, it exposes your emotional weather. If your handwriting slants to the right, you're reaching outward. You move toward connection, toward others. You likely crave emotional closeness, even if you don't say it out loud. That rightward lean is your inner voice whispering, "Notice me. Understand me. Come closer." But if it slants left, you're pulling back into memory, into caution, into the soft shield of solitude. You love, but carefully. You reveal, but selectively. You move through the world with your back slightly pressed against the wall, not out of fear, but out of knowing too much. Then there's the pressure. Heavy-handed writers, whose pens dent the paper, often carry a weight they haven't named, deep emotion, held in anger, longing that never found a place to land. The pressure reveals what the mouth won't say. I'm carrying something I can't release. On the other hand, if your strokes are faint, like your hand might float off the page at any second, you might be drifting emotionally, too hovering above your own needs, trained to take up less space, to ask for less than you truly want. Look at the space between your words. Are they tightly packed, almost colliding? That might be you, craving closeness but fearing the vulnerability it demands. Or maybe the letters drift apart like strangers passing in a hallway. That's the hand of someone who's learned to be enough for themselves, but not without cost. Because too much space can become a shield. And shields, while they protect, also isolate. Jung taught that what we do unconsciously tells a far deeper story than what we say. Your handwriting isn't just communication, it's confession. So the next time your hand moves across a page, slow down, watch it, feel it, ask yourself, am I writing a sentence or am I revealing a secret? Because the ink may dry, but the longing that stays pressed between every line. Watch yourself next time you point, tap a table, or gesture while speaking. You might think it's just motion, habit, but it's not. The first finger you use when your body reacts without thinking reveals a subconscious thread woven through your inner landscape. Because in the theater of the hand, every finger carries a different role, a different charge, a different unmet desire waiting to be seen. If it's the index finger you lead with, there's no mistaking your inner compass direction, authority, the hunger to guide or be heard. This is the finger of command, of leadership. When your dominant hand instinctively calls on it, you're not just expressing a thought, you're trying to shape reality. Carl Jung might say this reveals a desire to impose structure on a world that too often feels chaotic. A longing not just to act, but to direct. And behind that, a subtle fear. If I don't lead, who will? But if you gesture with the middle finger, whether it's a tap, a twitch, or a flick across your phone, you're expressing something more primal. This is the finger of repressed energy, frustration. Often misunderstood as rebellious, but more often it reflects what you've held back. Anger you swallowed, desire you silenced, passion you redirected. The middle finger doesn't just speak, it protests. It's the part of you that wants to scream into a world that keeps asking for silence. You may not say what you want, but your hand does. And then there's the thumb, so easily overlooked, yet so powerfully symbolic. When it leads, you're asserting something deep: independence, identity, will. This is the gesture of someone who won't be controlled, who moves through life with quiet authority. You might not dominate a room, but you'll never let it shape you. The thumb says, I choose. And beneath that autonomy may lie a deeper truth that you've spent years untangling from the grip of others' expectations. Jung believed every action we take unconsciously is a message from the psyche, so ask yourself, which finger speaks first when you're not paying attention? Because it's not just pointing at something out there, it's pointing at something in you, and maybe that's the direction you've been avoiding all along. Hold out your hand, not to receive, not to reach, but just to see. Look at the shape of your palm. Is it flat and stretched, like you're offering something to the world? Or is it cupped slightly, as if holding something sacred? This isn't palmistry, this is psychology, Jungian psychology. And your hand's natural posture may say more about your inner archetype than any test or title ever could. A flat palm open, spread, unguarded often belongs to the giver, the doer, the warrior. People with this shape tend to move outward first. They offer, they initiate, they carry burdens that aren't theirs because they were taught that strength looks like always showing up. It's the hand of someone who learned early on to act, to fix, to protect. But often, buried beneath that bravery is a forgotten desire, to be held to. On the other hand, a cupped palm tells a different story. This is the vessel, the container, the archetype of the mystic, the healer, the intuitive. You don't force your energy outward. You gather, you feel before you act, you observe before you speak, and in that space, something sacred grows: intuition, empathy, the quiet kind of power that doesn't need an audience to exist. But for many, this shape also reveals a lifetime of preservation. You've been holding things in not to hide, but to protect your dreams, your depth, your tenderness. Now look at the fingers. Are they tightly held together, or naturally apart? Do you hide your palm in pockets or flash it freely when you speak? These micro-movements are not random. They reflect your comfort with vulnerability, your willingness to be seen, and your unconscious response to intimacy. Jung might say your hand shape is the silhouette of your psychological armor, the lack of it. Every archetype lives in us: the warrior, the caregiver, the wanderer, the sage. But often, one steps forward more than the others. And your hand, without ever speaking a word, has already shown you who that is. So stop and look again. Not with the eyes of judgment, but with the gaze of self-inquiry. Your palm is not just skin and muscle, it's a map. Not of where you've been, but of who you truly are beneath all the roles you've had to play. Watch yourself the next time you reach for something. Do your fingers move with precision, speed, and almost dance-like confidence? Or do they pause, hover, hesitate like they're asking for permission before acting? Your dominant hand, in how it moves through space, tells a silent story. Not just about coordination, but about desire and fear. Carl Jung taught that behind every action lies a deeper motive, often unconscious. And when it comes to dexterity, the contrast between fluidity and caution isn't just physical, it's psychological. If your hand moves easily, intuitively, adapting without effort, it might be because something inside you longs for freedom. Not chaos, but spaciousness. A life with fewer rules and more instinct. These people tend to act first, reflect later. And not because they're careless, but because their deepest desire is to feel alive. To trust that movement, even imperfect, is better than paralysis. But if your hand hesitates, lingers before writing, struggles with small tasks, stiffens under pressure, that's no accident. That's the psyche pulling back. A hidden fear whispering, "What if I get it wrong?" This isn't incompetence, it's conditioning, often shaped by years of being overcorrected, second-guessed, or made to feel like mistakes were dangerous. So the body learns caution. And that caution, while protective, also reveals a deep, hidden yearning to be allowed to move freely without punishment. Notice when the hesitation shows up. Is it in new environments? Around certain people? During moments of vulnerability? Because those are the spaces where your unconscious is trying to protect you. Trying to say, this feels risky. And yet, in that risk might be the very liberation you crave. Your dominant hand doesn't lie. Whether it moves like water or stutters like a skipped beat, it carries the residue of every emotional pattern you've learned. Jung believed that the unconscious always finds a way to speak, and sometimes its clearest voice is movement. So the next time you notice your hand flying across a page or freezing over a keyboard, pause, not to judge, but to listen. What is your body trying to say? What freedom are you craving? What fear are you still holding? And most importantly, what would happen if you let go? Have you ever caught yourself twisting a ring, picking at your nails, rubbing your fingers together when no one's watching? Those unconscious hand gestures, the ones that slip out during conversation, boredom, or stress, are not random. They're signals, not loud ones, whispered ones. Soft messages from your unconscious, trying to get your attention. Carl Jung would call these moments archetypal echoes, fragments of deeper emotions that never found a place to land. Your dominant hand, being your primary instrument of action, becomes the messenger. When you fidget, you're not just nervous, you're expressing unmet needs, emotional pressure, suppressed longing, and often a subtle ache for grounding. Touching your face, especially your mouth or jaw, can signal a desire to speak but a fear of being heard. Hair twirling might look innocent, even flirty, but it often masks uncertainty or a hunger for soothing. Nail picking, tapping, or scratching? These are micro-discharges, your body releasing what your words never got to say. The gesture becomes the outlet, the self-soothing mechanism, the way the psyche negotiates between what you feel and what you're allowed to show. And here's the powerful part. These habits don't just reveal stress, they point directly to your emotional blueprint. People who fidget often are usually deeply sensitive, highly perceptive, and carrying more internal weight than they let on, not weak-attuned. And with that attunement comes cost. Overstimulation, undervalidation, the invisible labor of constantly managing other people's energy while silently neglecting their own. So when your dominant hand fidgets, it's not betraying you, it's protecting you. It's saying, there's something here I haven't said out loud, something you maybe didn't feel safe expressing, something too complex, or too sacred, or too easily dismissed. And so, instead of erupting, it surfaces gently, in a flick, a tug, a touch. Jung believed that the unconscious isn't out to sabotage us, it's trying to make us whole, even in silence, even in restless hands. So, pay attention. The next time your fingers start to move without permission, don't just stop them. Ask them what they're trying to say. Because sometimes, healing begins not with a scream but with a small, trembling gesture that finally gets noticed. Conflict doesn't begin with words, it begins with the body. And if you look closely, really closely, you'll notice it begins with your hands, more specifically, with your dominant hand. The one that rises first in defense, in protest, in urgency. The one that either reaches out or shuts down. Jung understood that emotional confrontation isn't just psychological, it's embodied. And your dominant hand, trained by habit and fueled by instinct, becomes your first emotional weapon or shield. So, how do you move in moments of tension? Do you push away with your palm facing outward, creating space between you and the world? That's not just a reaction, it's a boundary drawn in motion. You're not only saying no, you're screaming it through gesture. That push is a refusal. A line that says, "I will not let this cross into me." And while it may look aggressive, it often comes from a history of having that boundary ignored too many times before. Or maybe you reach out. You touch someone's arm, extend a hand mid-argument, grasp at connection even when the conversation is sharp. That's the dominant hand, not defending but yearning. Trying to pull closeness out of chaos. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a signal of deep emotional intelligence and deep emotional risk. Because to reach out in conflict is to say, even in this, I still want you near. Then there are those who freeze, who keep their hands still, tucked away, tightly folded, or hidden behind crossed arms. It seems calm, maybe even controlled, but it often masks the loudest inner storm. Still, hands in conflict don't mean peace, they mean suppression, a trained silence, an internal scream that never found its volume. Because sometimes you've been told your feelings don't belong in the room, and so your hands learned to disappear before your voice even had the chance. In every argument, every disagreement, your dominant hand steps forward first, before your logic, before your words. It shows how you protect yourself, or don't. It reveals whether you've learned to fight for your truth or learned to survive by withholding it. Jung believed we replay the same psychic scripts again and again until we become conscious of them. And often, that awakening begins not in our mind, but in our hands. You don't use it often. The hand you write less with, reach for less with, the one that lingers just a beat behind. The non-dominant hand lives in the background, quiet, reserved, almost forgotten. But what if I told you that hand isn't weaker? It's deeper. That in the rare moments you choose it instinctively, not strategically, your unconscious is letting something slip, something you've kept in the dark. Something Jung would call the shadow. Carl Jung described the shadow as the part of ourselves we don't want to see, the parts we reject, deny, suppress, not because they're evil, but because they don't fit the story we've been told we should live. And the non-dominant hand, so often silent, becomes the vessel for that hidden self. Because when the conscious hand steps back, the unconscious gets a turn to speak. Have you ever caught yourself brushing hair behind your ear with your left hand, even though you're right-handed? Or stirring a drink, sketching in the margins, touching your chest with the hand you don't typically use? Those moments are not mistakes, they're clues. Tiny ruptures in the surface where a deeper truth slips through. Maybe your shadow wants to be softer, more nurturing, more receptive, more emotionally open. But the dominant hand has learned survival, control, efficiency. So the non-dominant hand reaches toward a different way of being. Or maybe your shadow is full of rage, or sensuality, or grief, feelings the dominant self never got permission to feel. And so when your passive hand takes over, you feel strange, disoriented, vulnerable. But it's not the hand that's awkward, it's the truth it carries. Try this. Write with your non-dominant hand, not perfectly, just honestly. Let it scribble, curve, break formation. You'll notice something wild: it doesn't obey the same rules. And neither does the voice behind it. Because this hand isn't performing, it's confessing. Jung taught that we can't become whole until we meet our shadow, and often that meeting doesn't happen in words or dreams, but in sensation, in a hand we never trusted, in a movement that feels foreign but strangely familiar. So next time your non-dominant hand moves, don't correct it, don't switch back, watch it. Let it finish what the rest of you was too proud or too afraid to begin. Touch reveals what language tries to hide. And the hand you use to touch the dominant one is a direct channel from your unconscious to the world. Carl Jung believed that our most subtle behaviors are the clearest reflections of our psyche, and nowhere is this more evident than in how we use our hands to connect or not connect on a physical, sensual level. Think about how you touch others, not in performance, not in duty, but in presence. When your dominant hand reaches out to caress a face, trace a spine, linger on a shoulder, what does it say? That kind of touch isn't just a gesture, it's a form of speaking, one that reveals desire, memory, hunger, restraint. Because while the mouth speaks thoughts, the hand speaks longing. If you find yourself using your dominant hand to touch confidently, instinctively, without overthinking, it may reflect a person more in tune with their sensual nature. You may be comfortable with closeness, with physical intimacy, with letting desire take form. But if that hand stiffens under pressure, if it retracts quickly, avoids soft contact, skips over vulnerable places, it might not be about rejection. It might be about protection. Something in you has learned to guard the very thing you crave. And then there's the lightness, the feather touch that lingers but never presses. That's not indecision. That's caution wrapped in tenderness. A way of saying, I want this, but only if it's safe. It's a negotiation between desire and memory, between what the body wants and what the heart remembers. Avoidance is loud too. When your dominant hand doesn't reach at all, when you fold your arms, fidget, or keep distance, it doesn't mean you don't feel. It often means you feel too much. And the hand has learned to stay out of the fire for fear of being burned again. Jung knew that sexuality wasn't just physical, it was archetypal. It reflected life force, creativity, connection to the self and the other. So pay attention to the way you use your withhold touch, because your dominant hand isn't just acting, it's expressing your most hidden desire, to be felt, to be held, to be known, even if you're not yet ready to ask for it out loud. Look at what you reach for first. What tool do you grab with your dominant hand when you want to do something? A pen? A paintbrush? A phone? A steering wheel? A weapon? These choices aren't just preferences, they're projections, extensions of your psyche revealing what you secretly crave, to create, to communicate, or to control. Jung believed we externalize what we cannot yet internalize. So the tools you're drawn to aren't just objects, they're archetypes in motion. A pen, for example, is not just for writing, it's for declaring, for translating thought into form, for shaping narrative. If your dominant hand constantly reaches for a pen, maybe your hidden desire is to be heard, not casually, but clearly, authentically. Maybe you've spent too much time in silence and your hand is trying to tell your story before your voice gets the courage to. A paintbrush? That's expression without restriction, color without containment. You may be yearning for freedom, for beauty, for spaces where mess is allowed, where perfection isn't the goal, presence is. And maybe that's what your soul wants more than anything, a place where you don't have to edit who you are to be seen. What about a phone? Constant contact, constant reaching, a bridge between you and someone else, a tool of connection but also of distraction. If your dominant hand is always on the screen, scrolling, typing, responding, maybe it's not just habit, maybe it's a sign of a deeper hunger to be part of something, to belong. Even if that connection is pixel deep. And then there's the darker side tools of control, a knife in the kitchen, a hammer, a locked steering wheel. These aren't sinister, they're symbolic. Sometimes, your dominant hand reaches for what gives you a sense of power, not out of aggression, but out of a need to feel capable, stable, in charge. Especially if the rest of your life feels like it's moving without your consent. Your hand will always find the object that matches your inner need, creation or defense, message or movement, touch or retreat. Jung would ask you, what are you trying to build and what are you trying to keep at bay? The answers are already in your fingers. All you have to do is watch what they reach for when you're not even trying. You brush your teeth, stir your coffee, unlock the front door every day the same way. These acts seem automatic, insignificant. But according to Jung, there is no such thing as a meaningless habit. Your dominant hand, the one that moves first in these small rituals, is not simply actingits, remembering, repeating, reinforcing something deep you may not even know you're carrying. Think about it. The way you zip your jacket, button your shirt, tap the steering wheel at a red light. These aren't just movements. They're coded behaviors that reveal how you approach life, with tension or ease, urgency or rhythm, resistance or surrender. That toothbrush in your dominant hand, is it gripped tightly, rushed across your teeth like you're racing the clock? Or is it soft, patient, almost meditative? That alone tells a story. A story about how you care for yourself or how you've been taught to hurry through self-care just to get it over with. Consider how you unlock your door. Do you fumble, impatient, as if you're already somewhere else? Or do you pause, steady, as if honoring a boundary only you have the right to cross? Your dominant hand is performing these motions not randomly but because your psyche has chosen them, and each choice says something. Maybe you stir your coffee slowly, clockwise, as if creating a rhythm of calm in a chaotic world. Or maybe you spill a little, always multitasking, never fully present. That's not clumsiness. That's the unconscious screaming, "You've been asked to do too much, too fast, for too long." These mundane acts done in the same way, every day become a kind of choreography of the soul. The dominant hand, through repetition, tells you who you've become and what you believe you must be. Jung believed that what we repeat without thinking often reflects a belief we never chose but inherited. And so, the question becomes, what are your daily movements trying to prove? That you're efficient? That you're gentle? That you're in control? Watch closely. Your routines are rituals, and your dominant hand is the high priest, carrying out the ceremony. So ask yourself, every now and then, not just how you move, but why. You might discover that the most ordinary gestures are actually the most revealing truths. Close your eyes and think back to your last dream. Did you reach for something, hold something, touch someone? If so, which hand did you use? Most people never notice. But Jung would insist that you should, because in dreams, where the ego loosens its grip and the unconscious takes the wheel, every detail is a symbol. And the hand you use in those moments, especially when it's your dominant one, can say everything about what you desire, fear, or have yet to face. If your dominant hand is active in your dreams, writing, reaching, creating, fighting, it suggests your conscious self is still trying to direct the narrative, even in sleep. You may be someone who craves agency, clarity, structure, but it also may mean that your inner self still feels the need to prove, to perform, to stay in control even when no one's watching. You want resolution, you want order, and your dominant hand becomes the dream's protagonist, acting out your waking ambitions in symbolic form. But what if it's your non-dominant hand that suddenly takes over? That's not just dream logic, that's the unconscious stepping forward. This can be unsettling. Using the wrong hand in a dream can feel off, disorienting. But that strangeness is the point. Your psyche is trying to speak in a voice you usually ignore. Maybe the non-dominant hand writes a message, or strikes someone, or holds a key. That's your shadow self showing up with something to say about power, shame, desire, or healing. And then there are dreams where you have no hands at all, or where your dominant hand is injured, restrained, unreachable. These are not nightmares, they're metaphors. They might reflect feeling powerless, unheard, unseen in waking life. Jung would see this as the ego confronting its limits. When your hand is taken away in a dream, it often means your will is being suppressed. You want to act, to choose, to touch life, but something is stopping you. Your dream hand is not random, it's a compass, and whichever one you use, or can't use, is a direct line to a truth your waking mind has struggled to face. So the next time you wake from a dream, ask yourself not just what happened, but which hand moved first. Because the answer may point to the very desire you've buried deepest, the desire to act from a place of wholeness, not habit. What happens when you switch hands? Maybe by choice, maybe by force, an injury, a shift, a need to adapt. Suddenly, the hand you've always used, the one that wrote your name, stirred your coffee, reached for what you loved, goes quiet, and the other rises, hesitant, shaky, unfamiliar. It feels wrong at first, unnatural. But if you pay attention, something deeper is happening. According to Jung, every adaptation in the psyche carries meaning. Sometimes, what we call adjustment is actually survival. Sometimes it's growth, and other times it's a sign of repression. If you've trained yourself to use your non-dominant hand, the question isn't, can you do it? It's, Why did you need to? Was it necessity, or was it avoidance? Injuries, physical or emotional, often mark the places where energy gets blocked, where desire was punished or agency taken, and so, unconsciously, we shift. The dominant hand becomes a reminder of what hurt, of what was lost, and the other one's passive, ignored becomes a stand-in. It's not just a new hand, it's a new narrative, a new way of relating to the world. But with it often comes friction. You may feel less expressive, less sure. That's because the psyche is rewiring itself, and every movement now echoes with meaning. And yet, for some, this shift can be healing, because when you engage the other hand, you also awaken the other side of your brain, the other side of yourself. The intuitive, the emotional, the quiet places you never gave full power to. What begins as frustration slowly becomes revelation. You're not just using a different hand. You're touching a part of you that was always there just waiting. Jung would say, this is individuation in motion, the integration of opposites, the conscious meeting the unconscious, not in thought but in form. So whether your shift was forced or chosen, don't ignore it. Don't rush to return to normal. Because maybe what you're feeling isn't just change. Maybe it's transformation. And sometimes, the most authentic parts of you only wake up when the familiar is finally set down. By now, you've seen it. Your dominant hand isn't just a tool, it's a message, a mirror, a map. Every grip, every gesture, every unconscious twitch, it all means something. Jung believed that the body doesn't just obey the mind, it reveals it, that your physical instincts are psychic expressions. So when your hand moves, without permission or plan, you are witnessing desire in its rawest form. Maybe you've noticed how your fingers tighten around a steering wheel when you're unsure of where you're going. Maybe you've realized how your hand hovers over your phone, not because you want to connect, but because you're afraid no one will answer. Maybe you stir your coffee 3 times to calm your nerves. Or press your fingertips together when you feel the world slipping out of your control. These aren't habits, these are whispers, the kind your unconscious sends when the voice gets too tired to speak, and your dominant hand, the hand of action, of choice, of identity, is the loudest whisper of all. So ask yourself this, and not just once. What does your hand do when you're not watching? What does it reach for? What does it avoid? Where does it tense? Where does it soften? Because the answers live there, in the quiet, in the in-between, in the pause before motion, in the shadow behind the grip. Jung once said, "The body is merely the visibility of the soul, the psyche, and the soul is the psychological experience of the body. You are not separate from what you touch or how you move. You are telling a story with every reach, every recoil, every moment of stillness." So, tell me, what have you noticed about your hands? What story have they been telling all along while you were too busy to listen? Share your experience in the comments. Write what your hand does when no one's looking, because that's where the real truth lives. And if this resonated with you, if it stirred something you hadn't seen before, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Here, we don't just talk about behavior, we talk about being, about presence, about the soul in motion. Because your hand has never been just a hand. It has always been a mirror. You just had to learn how to look. This story was intense. But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.